great majority of freight around this country. The second point I want to make is that we rapidly have to move to the point where we see transport as one of the most powerful shapers of our communities, of the towns and cities where we live. And for the best part of now 60 odd years in this country, we have basically handed control of the design and construction of our cities to an unholy alliance of property developers and the roads lobby. And it has to stop. We have to take back control of the places where we live. We have to design exciting, beautiful, creative cities and neighbourhoods and town centres and public spaces where the transport system serves the people, not the other way around. And I come from Auckland, and I speak from bitter experience. The obsession that we've had in this country with building more and more massive motorways has destroyed huge swathes of my hometown. And it's been really interesting because I think we've reached a tipping point in Auckland on this issue. The huge majority of the public now know we cannot simply go on building motorways. We have to find more creative solutions. People in this country know that those solutions are at hand. And in our cities, we have to build the cities of the future around smart public transport solutions. The third point that I want to make is that, and I know this pertains to Generation Zero's mission, is that we have to build a resilient transport system that insulates our society and our economy from shocks, oil shocks, price volatility for oil. We have to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel and get our carbon emissions down.
Okay, thank you. The second question for you is, the current government plans to see $12 billion spent on the 7 roads of national significance, RONs. About 40% of the total transport budget for this decade and 75% of all spending on new infrastructure. The government has just proposed a law change to allow it to borrow money to pay for the RONs. What are your views on the merits of the RONs, and what would your party definitely change and or consider changing? And you have 2 minutes to answer this, so if you can tackle them there.
Try and cover such a huge issue in 2 minutes. The first thing is governments get to plan, and I like to talk about the 4-year figures that are formally set out in budgets. And if you look at those figures, our government is going to spend $4 billion over the next 4 years on rail, $8 billion in terms of the road network. So 66% of the budget is going into roads. And people say, oh, that's an unfair proportion. Well, I think we need to consider the complete picture. 86% of people movements are currently, in terms of their work, by road transport, by road. If you add the buses on top of that, which of course use the roads, that's up to 94% of those people movements. Now, if you come to the question of freight, 92% of the 20 million tonne kilometres in New Zealand is done by road. So to be spending 2/3 of the vote over the next 4 years on road transport is actually lesser than the proportion of either the freight movements or the people movements. And the other key factor that is lost in the characterisation of the debate is that, of course, 100% of this money that we're talking about allocating all comes off the road. In other words, people say, well, why isn't it fair that rail gets a bigger share of the 1.4 billion that the government gets per year in petrol taxes and road user charges? Well, of course, all of that petrol tax and road user charge is coming from road users, and it is a cross-subsidy over to them from the other. Quite specifically on the issue of those roads of national significance, I'm one of those that says that given we are looking at a growth from 20 million kilometre tonnes to 30 million kilometre tonnes, and the huge environmental damage that goes with highly congested traffic, projects like Waterview, projects like improving those road networks is absolutely critical if we're realistic part of the government's program.
Really tough to talk about the wrongs in 2 minutes. Can we have 30? Talk about the wrongs. This is the defining feature of the national government's transport policy. They handpicked these 7 mega motorway projects. They gave many of them the green light even before the most rudimentary economic analysis had been done on them. They declared they were going to build, come hell or high water, these roads of national significance, and they are going as fast as they can. They are spending money like there's no tomorrow, trying to get them to build as fast as possible. And we saw recently that the government had spent $216 million on design and investigation work for 5 of the 7 prongs. Some of these motorways won't be built for years, for decades. We heard a few days ago that they've spent $8 million on public relations for the roads, trying to convince an increasingly sceptical public that these motorways are a good thing. What they're doing is locking New Zealand to a high carbon, high fossil fuel transport future. That is the impact of these things. They started off justifying them as a kind of a stimulus package, whereas in fact building motorways is probably one of the worst kinds of economic stimulus that we could hope for. Rapid transit or social housing would be much, much better in terms of the spin-off economic spin-off and jobs in the local world. Damn, I was just getting started. I want to respond just to 2 arguments that we make. These are arguments that we often hear in the House, for example. Stephen Joyce, whenever he's asked about public transport, will say, oh, look, 84% of New Zealanders use the car to get to work. That's why we have to build more motorways. Well, you know what? There's a reason people use the car to get to work. There's no alternative. We cannot go on justifying the spending of so much of our national transport budget on roads and motorways because of a user pays system. We have built a system where road taxes, diesel and petrol tax, are what generates the funds, the majority of the funds for our transport system. As long as that system's in place, if we leave it there and we keep building motorways, then we just lock ourselves in to a circular argument and a high carbon future.
I'll just pick up where Phil left off about the 86% of people drive. I mean, we should also point out that that statistic's from 2006, the last census. I think things probably changed since then. But it's not like people drive because there was a free market choice and this is what they chose. What we know is that our historical spending and policies have unintentionally subsidized vehicle trips. And the cost of that is that they've made it harder for people to walk, cycle, and take public transport even when they want to. But let's talk about cross-subsidies, because within our transport network, there are massive cross-subsidies. And in fact, the biggest subsidy is going to be from ordinary road users who are stuck in traffic in Christchurch and Wellington and Auckland and all over the country. And their petrol money, because they have no other option, is going to be going to fund a few big motorway projects that actually will only carry about 4% of the total trips in New Zealand. 4%. So that's a big cross-subsidy. There's no such thing as user pays in transport. I think it would be a much better use of road users' money if those projects were put into public transport, which actually freed up the roads for the people who still need to drive, for the freight that needs to get around. That's just logical. And that's just, that's just the facts. The Waterview connection, will the Waterview connection reduce congestion? No, nowhere in the Western world has building urban motorways reduced congestion. Everywhere where they have built motorways, and I'd be happy to provide this, the research and the evidence to Dr. Smith, because he clearly has been exposed to it. People drive further, they drive longer distances, it changes the land use, it results in more carbon emissions, it results in more fuel use, and it reduces people's options. And so, and it certainly doesn't result in reduced congestion. But I just want to show, this is from the briefing to the incoming minister, and what it shows is that just even in the last 3 years since we've moved to the Roads of National Significance program, the spending on state highways has become very, very low economic efficiency. So I don't see how the government can argue that they care about the economy and continue with this spending program.
Thanks to MPs for the responses there. I just did want to chime in and question some of those figures that you put up, Nick, because according to what I've seen in the National Infrastructure Plan 2011, the actual government proportion of the investment in rail over the next, its plan is 900 million, and so I just wanted to highlight.
There's electrification of Auckland Rail alone. There's the new trains in both Auckland and Wellington, as well as Project Turnaround. All of those four projects.
They were about 10 years ago.
So I just encourage the audience to check into those figures because I think there's more than government contributions being included. But anyway, we'll move on with the second question, which I will hand over to Rachel to introduce.
So do you and your party support central government investment and major public transport infrastructure, such as Auckland's City Rail Link and Light Rail in Wellington? And if so, in what proportion and on what conditions? If not, how do you suggest the money should be raised if the projects are to go ahead? And we'll start with Phil, and you've got a nice speech.
Thank you. Yes, Labor does support central government investment in public transport projects in our cities. There's an idea that you hear a lot in transport that the National Land Transport Fund, which is where all the petrol and diesel tax goes, is hypothecated, which is an interesting word. It means that it's actually tagged for spending on transport, and there's a view that you often hear that it must be spent on roads and motorways. Not true. We can spend it on public transport, and we can spend it on both capital projects, building new infrastructure, but we can also spend it on subsidising public transport. Labor will do that because we believe it's vital for the efficiency and the quality of life in our cities. A massive shift to public transport, particularly in Auckland, is one of the most vital things that we have to do in terms of building a livable city. The most successful, is it a morning bill? Sorry to keep using Auckland examples, but one of the most stunningly successful pieces of transport infrastructure built recently has been the Northern Busway, which is now delivering 1/3 of the number of people that cross the Harbour Bridge every morning are on buses that have been travelling on the busway. It's taken 2 lanes of traffic off the Harbour Bridge every morning. If we didn't have that successful piece of public transport, we would be in terrible, terrible trouble with congestion on State Highway 1. So, yes, we must spend more on public transport than Labor will do it.
Yes, the Green Party absolutely supports City Rail Link in Auckland, investigating whatever it is that the high-capacity public transport solution that is best for Wellington, which we think is likely to be light rail, but I don't want to prejudice the study before it comes out. And Christchurch, we fund public transport projects like these to 60%. That's 1.4 billion City Rail Link and up to 300 million in Christchurch and Wellington. And we could do all this. I've got the spreadsheet with the GPS. Even though we would still have some money going on safety upgrades to state highways, certainly renewals of state highways, we could fund all of this and still have heaps of money left over. That's the amazing thing. That's the opportunity cost that we don't see, what we're going to miss out on if this government has its way and blows billions and billions of dollars on the motorways. But the other aspect to this is allowing city councils, regional councils to raise revenue as well for their own public transport projects, and there are a lot of opportunities for them to do this. Really smart ways like land value uplift capture, and again, through managing parking, you can raise a lot of additional revenue. So we think it'll also be good for ratepayers as well